Hello, and welcome to Such a Nightmare Conversations about Horror. My name is Katherine Troyer, and I am so excited that I get to be joined, as I always get to be joined, by Toni Tresca.
Hey there!
This is a podcast where the horrifically nerdy meets the terrifyingly academic, as we explore that fine line between the horrific and the horrible. Each episode looks at a specific horror text that is for better or worse, giving us nightmares.
And we are so excited to have you join us today for our conversation over 2022's Nope.
Ah, yes, Nope. I have so many thoughts, and I'm gonna just begin by saying that I'm not entirely sure that they are in any sort of semblance of order. So before we get into what will apparently be me just having lots of disconnected thoughts, Toni, would you be willing to give a brief summary of the film for those people who have seen it and just don't remember it? You probably should watch this film before listening to this episode because there's going to be many spoilers ahead. But in case you haven't seen the film, this will also let you know what's happening in Nope.
So, we are in Hollywood land. We are in the land of filmmaking, and we're following a family who specializes in bringing horses in for Hollywood television and things in the industry. We're following Otis and Emerald Haywood as they are trying to navigate their way through Hollywood when all of a sudden Hollywood and casting and filling horse quantity is the last thing on their mind when they are met by an unidentified flying object, although they'll soon learn it's not an object quite. And I guess that's probably where we should jump in. So this is not our first time talking about Jordan Peele on the podcast.
No, in fact, Jordan Peele is in large reason the reason we started this podcast.
Yeah, I would agree. If our listeners don't know, we talked about it in our 50th episode and also on the Us episode, Us, the 2019 film by Jordan Peele. We had a bit of a mixed reaction to that film in comparison to Jordan Peele's first film, Get Out, from 2017.
Yes. And we also had a mixed reaction compared to how it seemed most people were responding to us. And so if you look at our playlist, right, it is our third podcast episode, but it is actually the first episode we recorded. We just decided to maybe not begin our Such a Nightmare journey on such a negative note. So we decided to talk about some films that we enjoyed a little bit more. But yeah, Jordan Peele is part of our origin story, which he doesn't know, nor does he care, I'm sure. But no. He very much is. And so it's fitting that we are talking about Nope.
And I think this is perhaps the Jordan Peele film that we disagree on the most, it sounds like, from our initial conversation.
Yeah, so we were both very, very positive about Get Out.
Yes.
We both had much criticism for us, and the things that we liked in agreement. For example, every film student and horror scholar should watch the one of the many cold openings of Us that's set at the carnival or whatever that thing is, right? So we were very much in agreement about pretty much every beat for both Get Out and Us. But I think you're right that we are in disagreement here. So why don't we just go ahead and start by general impressions. Toni, how do you feel about Nope?
I really liked Nope. I really enjoyed the characters, I think, in this piece. I think these are my favorite characters that Jordan Peele has ever written for the film, for the screen.
Oh, interesting.
I loved the chemistry between Daniel Kaluuya and Keke Palmer as sibling relationships in a very healthy and different kind of sibling relationship than I've seen commonly portrayed on film, particularly in adult siblings like that. I found their relationship to just be incredibly endearing. And I also am a huge Stephen Young fan, and I loved all of the Gordy's home stuff and stuff that was going on over in that amusement park, just proving that if you give Jordan Peele a camera and a cinematographer, he can make any carnival look so deliciously good.
I am in agreement with the words that have come out of your mouth, the sentiments that you
Well,
have.
nice. I guess we can end the
Yeah,
podcast
so
early.
that end. And in fact, I want to start by saying that when the trailer came out, and I closed my eyes as I usually do in horror film trailers about halfway through because I don't want to see all of the scenes that like you want to be surprised by. But from the start of knowing about Nope, I was like, Jordan Peele is making a film for me because I love backstage films, right? Like I love
Yeah.
films about films, always have, always will. I love films about theater. It's supposed to be a
Perhaps it's
tick
our
box.
perhaps it's our performing arts background that make
It
us
is most
particularly
certainly.
inclined.
Yes, it is most certainly that. But you and I also are just big fans of meta films, right? As a general rule. So, that was a point in his favor as someone who, like most girls and slash all humans should be, except for again those who might be allergic. I loved horses as a child, with a sort of passion untold. I starting with My Little Ponies, moving up to Breyer horses, moving up to real horses when I got to after like years of begging and weeping, take horse riding lessons. Never was able to convince my parents that we should buy a horse, but that's what happens when you're not wealthy. Um, but so it was like, this film's going to be about Hollywood behind the scenes. I was like, yay. And
Yeah.
horses. I was like, yay. And it's going to be Jordan Peele. And I was like, and so much like the windsock puppets, my arms were like writhing in the air and I was super excited.
Yes.
I also really, really like Daniel Kaluuya, and I'm a big fan of Stephen Yeun. So again, there were the actors that I was excited about. But to be perfectly honest, it's not even that I hated this film. It's that I just felt very ambivalent about most of it.
Yeah.
And when I had feelings, most of them were closer to the negative end of the spectrum than the positive, or there were more towards the negative end than the positive. So I did not enjoy the relationship between the siblings because I very much felt for OJ, for Otis Jr., and it frustrated me how he was having to be, the one being responsible time and again. Like, so it was very hard for me to find, even though Keke Palmer was amazing, she did a good job as an actress. I didn't find her character, I didn't find Emerald to be as funny as I know a lot of people did, because for me, she was deeply frustrating.
And
So,
I think that's very fair. I think that I kind of like that two different relationships to kind of this responsibility that they both have. It's just, and I thought that it kind of it made for some interesting tension, and
yes,
I was into it. I think particularly because I think you could always clearly tell where each of these characters was coming from. Like Keke Palmer's
yes,
character of Emerald clearly did not have any interest in this horse farm and was definitely had fixed her sights elsewhere and was trying to get out. Whereas Kaluuya's character just was this was the only way he knows. This is the only
right,
operating status that he knows. And so you put these two people in the same room. I think it's only natural that they're going to butt heads. And I could
yes.
definitely see why you'd definitely be annoyed with Keke Palmer's character, but I thought it made for interesting tension and
It
felt very
did.
realistic to sibling
Yes.
relationships, particularly to their families. Because I'm like,
No, I think you're absolutely correct. I think it's so you had said earlier that you used the word healthy and talk about the siblings. And I disagree with that word choice, but I think you're right that the tension is really effective. If we extend the metaphor that Peele's using of thinking about, types of horses, OJ's character is definitely that horse that like doesn't really want to be there but is dependable, right? And Emerald is that horse that like is perhaps too high spirited and you might have to sell, which we actually see that conversation happening, right? Where Otis Sr. is like, this horse is a fine horse, but not a good horse for us, right? So I actually thought like that part was lovely. I think my problem is that I felt like too much of the comedy and the comedic timing rested on you finding Emerald's character either relatable or precious or likable, and I didn't. So a lot of her humor for me fell flat. And one of my favorite parts about Peele is that he knows how to make horror about comedy too. And I just felt like for me, I know some people have said that this was the funniest for them of the three films. For me, it's
yeah,
the least funny.
interesting. I think I was inclined to. I think I actually think it's about as funny as Get Out. I don't know if it's funnier. I've seen Get Out more times than I've seen
Right.
this film. I guess just also for our listeners, we've at this point we've both this only seen Nope one time. So,
Correct.
um, but yeah, I thought that Kiki Palmer's. I liked her bits. She felt like real people whom I know in the entertainment industry who just
See, and that's
always
why I
have
didn't
their
like her.
who always has their their vape pen and is just like so aloof and is clearly they're the good at the talky talk, but they have no empathy. And so I was like, I don't know if maybe healthy or maybe I take back the word healthy, but
Yeah.
realistic, and I know who this person is. Maybe was like I was able to find the humor in that situation because I'm like, I think that is I was just able to acknowledge that character as being kind of a sad, like almost a satirical element of like what you have to do in kind of the business entertainment world, and I think that relates to the larger themes
See,
of spectacle and entertainment industry. And Kiki Palmer has a lot more in common, I think, with Stephen Young's character than she does with
yes.
Daniel Kaluuya's character.
And you know what? You saying this like makes perfect sense to me because you're right. She is absolutely a perfect sort of somewhere between caricature and, composite character of all those people. And honestly, those people are the reason that I decided not to go further in theater or film on the industry
You see,
sides
well, there you go. That
because
makes
I
sense.
couldn't take them. Yes. So keeping that in mind, that explains a lot. Okay. So I did find funny though, if we're talking about things that I thought worked really, really well in terms of comedic elements, the character of Angel Torres, played by
Oh
Brandon
my god.
Perea,
The cinematographer?
yeah.
Is this the cinema? No. Oh, this is the
No,
tech.
this is not the
The
cinematographer.
cinematographer I want to
This is
talk
the
to, but the tech guy.
yes, yes. Yeah, this is the tech guy that's like the equivalent of the Geek Squad that keeps like inviting himself into the experience. Because I just thought, like I don't know if I've ever seen that before, right? We often in horror have these teams being built, right? And if it's like a film that's about like for example, a ghost hunter crew or whatever it might be, there's always that like moment, usually in some sort of montagey form where they're like, "This is Susan. Susan's our cinematographer," and then we see Susan take a long drag on her cigarette, and they're like, "This is Billy, and Billy is our medium." And like it's the team, right? I don't think I've ever seen a horror film where they're assembling a team and one of them has just literally forced themselves in
Yeah.
to the to the team. And so that was delightful and very amusing, as was the cinematographer.
Yeah, I think that the team that they get assembled by the third act, I think is very. I thought that had great chemistry together, and they were very,
Yes.
very amusing.
Yeah.
The cinematographers, I also think so accurate that he was just like willing to die for his shot. I was like, yeah, any cinematographer who I've ever met or talked to, I'm like, I think that's maybe another one of the things I liked about it. Is I think Jordan Peele has really, in this one, captured a lot of really specific types within entertainment.
Yes.
And a lot of types who I don't think normally are in the same room with each other.
Yes.
And forces them to not only be in the same room, but coordinating and organizing the capturing on film of this unidentified flying object.
Because one of Peele's strengths is that he understands so powerfully the way that you can communicate legions about a character through some tiny little element. So for example, the fact that the cinematographer, played by Michael Wincott, the character's name is Antlers Holst, the fact that he wears a kilt, right? I just kind of tells you everything you need to know about this character.
And the fact that he watches, like, when you first meet him, he's watching animals be consumed.
Yes.
You're like, mm-hmm.
Yes, he's watching his own footage over and over again, and also the fact that he's still doing almost all of it sort of old school style of editing. Yeah, we know everything we could possibly ever need to know. And again, I'm speaking about so many things that I liked about the film, and I also liked how the film began. I thought that opening scene where we see Otis Sr., be killed and we don't know yet why things are falling from the sky. I mean, Peele's a master at giving us these really unexpected scenes.
And same thing with that scene, as well as the scene in Gordy's home right at the beginning too.
Yes.
both
So,
so much full of
yeah, and I need to
mystery.
talk about Gordy's
Yeah,
home.
I
Yeah.
I noticed you hadn't mentioned my pal Gordy, whom I
Yes.
is one of the more
So,
interesting and I think elements of the film that I have the least clarity of thoughts around that segment. I think it's more interesting to me than anything. I at this point, what are your thoughts on the Gordy's
yeah,
home?
so I want to get into Gordy's home by talking about Stephen Yoon's character
Yeah,
for a second longer, Ricky Park. And because, this is a character that we start to peel back these layers on. And again, like you said, if each of these people is a composite of a certain type of character who's in Hollywood, from the people who honestly don't care that they're a part of Hollywood, it's just a job, then they like what they're doing, they just don't like the camera part, to people that are behind the cameras, like the cinematographer. Ricky's character is interesting, right? Because first off, he's wearing Western clothes, and but they're not real Western clothes, right? Like this costume of it. As someone who's Asian, if we think about all of the complicated ways that we have constructed Asian identities through our narratives of the Old West, that's really interesting. And then you find out that he also has the shrine to the show that was literally one of the most traumatic moments in his
yeah.
life.
I think it also is another element that he's also a child actor. Like that is his upbringing.
Yes,
So he's
yes. Oh, that's
always
so important.
been performing for an audience that is not himself.
Yes, yes. So I loved everything about that. I thought all of that was really great. I even really appreciated and thought it was super fascinating how, he had been making part of his show, bringing in this alien and just like watching, it consume people. So all of that I'm in favor for. And I also thought the most interesting and the best part of the film was probably the Gordy's home stuff,
Mm,
but I don't think it should have been in this film.
interesting.
I think that this is an example of someone, and this is my real big complaint with this film, period, is that somebody needed to tell Peele to edit. And
Interesting.
we've talked about this before with other, really like important figures, that like no one's going to be that person who's like, hey, by the way, Jordan Peele, even though you single-handedly, have changed the face of the horror genre, it'd be great if you cut out 30 minutes minimum of your film or created some better connections. But like, I thought it was too good to be wasted as a B line.
Interesting. I liked it kind of. I liked it a lot of the Gordy stuff because I think it particularly like related back to Stephen, the cyclical nature of Stephen Young's character and how he could really never escape this like initial incident and how then he was like basically forcing people to then relive his trauma over and over again. And then just because there had never been a breaking point to any of that, he just keeps doing it until he then literally creates that situation where he invites people in to be eaten and consumed by aliens.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. think it then should have been an A line,
As a
a part of the A plot, as opposed to this like weirdly embedded B plot. And that doesn't mean that the character needed to be in the film more or anything like that, but just the way that the film treated that segment didn't feel like it gave it the justice it deserved for how complex it is. And I realize you can have a subplot that's really complex that can still be a subplot. I just don't think it fit in this film. I think it just didn't make sense as it was presented, either with how long it was and it needed to be longer, or it needed to be shorter, or something. But there, even though I 100% agree with everything you said, in fact, I think it's brilliant what you said, I still feel like one of these things is not like the other, and not in a good way.
Yeah, I think that I liked the kind of the some of the ambivalence there and like how it was just kind of a kind of an acknowledgement of this character's distant past that it was, and you're showing like I thought that it and the jumping in it kind of came back, kind of reminded me of like almost flashbacks. And if we're taking it as
Mm-hmm.
being these Gordy's home segments are basically like PTSD flashbacks from Stephen Young, then I think I'm willing to go with it. And particularly like within, and that's why I think I'm okay with some of the weirder moments within it, like when the shoe is just standing up,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm like, well, of course he's a child. Maybe he's just focusing on these seemingly magical things that are happening in there
Mm-hmm.
to try to make sense of this trauma, to try to create a story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Because if there's no story, then was it worth it? then how do you justify, how do you continue going on after having watched all of these people die? And so I think maybe just from like, now I was willing to go with it because of like, it would, I thought I was like willing to think of it as like children's PTSD trauma flashbacks and like just these little moments in there to give us little color about Stephen Young's character. However, I also get the argument that it is an interesting enough plot line that that could have been its own film.
Again, you're saying such beautiful things that are so, I think, correct, not only in terms of how to read this film, but also correct in terms of speaking to Peele's bigger just talent as a storyteller. But I think that then I would have wanted either to see that sort of magic realist thread, or that like from the child's point of view or something like that from Otis Jr. too, or like
Yeah.
I feel like this film, and this is really my central biggest problem with this film, and it's a problem I had with Us, and so it worries me as a perhaps pattern, is that I don't think this film was as tight as it needed to be. I think that it was about 30 plus minutes too long, and I think that there were times that the film became a bit indulgent, and I felt that way about Us as well, which makes me wonder, because Peele spent so long on Get Out, because that was sort of his passion project that he was tightening and playing with all along, where is that line of where we're willing to say he's a genius enough of a writer and director that we're willing to say these other instances are, exceptional, and these moments of indulgence are worth it. And when, if it was another director, another writer, same film but not someone as well known as Peele, would we say this film was flawed, right? And I think we're quickly getting to the point where his status as an auteur is going to mean that some people are going to see this film as being better than it was, not for the sake of the film, but for the sake of Peele. And I know that my partner hated this film. I had to listen to like 45 minutes of her just being like, I hated this film. And she kind of went on, but what she was really saying at the end of the day was, for a film with this big of a budget, for a film with this amazing of a director and writer who has illustrated the power of being able to not hit us over the head with certain things, and to produce something that can be really tight. Something about this film just felt like it didn't hold up to what it could have, considering
And
the
I wonder
budget,
if there is some
the
like just
actors.
tension that is ever present in like this idea that he is tackling spectacle and this idea of like grandiose things of like you just throw everything at the wall kind of idea, that idea in Hollywood, big, go home. And
Yes.
I wonder if there's some tension in that, like, because that element is very present within the film. There are a lot of big spectacle
Yes.
sequences. If there's some tension there with also how much exploration and how interesting these characters are, I kind of enjoyed the revelatory, like a long character moments. I know been reading a
Mhm.
lot of discourse online about how people really did not enjoy the second act. They were like, the second act was so
Mm.
long, so meandering, and we just had to sit with these characters until the big UFO sequences would finally happen. And I
Mhm.
was like, I enjoyed those moments of character and how long he was teasing us to make us wait for it and kept twisting and playing with, because we were like, oh, it's the ship, it's the ship. What? No, it's an animal.
Yeah.
It's just an animal. And then it relating back to these other themes that have been really nicely established with the
Yeah.
horses throughout the rest of the film. But I also definitely see the tension of what you're saying of like, it's hard when you're like doing all the spectacle, throwing so much there, but also you're like, you only have so much time to make a film and you have people's
Well,
expectations.
and to be honest, I actually had very little problem with the concept of Act Two. I'm not even sure I had a problem with how long it took, because I actually think I appreciate films that remind us that if we were to ever be in this type of situation, we would not get our act together for weeks or
Right.
months. Like, and because we couldn't afford to financially, because you can only spend so long in flight or fight before you return back to what you were doing before. So I had no problems with the fact that it took them quite some time to figure it out. I think I just had problems with the fact that it felt like, instead of in Us, when we had several cold openings, in this film we just had several films, and I would be okay with that if I felt like if it had been stitched together properly, but I don't think it
I guess
was.
it all really came together for me in the third act with the final sequence of them kind attempting to capture on film this thing that has caused them so much
Mhm.
pain, and they're willing to let part of their team die for to capture this
Mhm.
spectacle to be able to entertain, which is literally what's happening in this movie, in the movie industry. And I think is
Yes.
also kind of, it nicely articulates a lot of the themes that are present within the other subplots and within these other characters, because it relates back to Stephen Young and this idea that you have to
Mhm.
put your trauma out there for people to see in order for it to give value. Relates back to these other two characters' struggles, that the only value they've been able to provide for Hollywood is through their horses, so they have to give back on that. That's the only thing they do. And what if they can't give that horse farm up? So they've got to continue to find a way to make it relevant. So I thought it all came together really well within that third act, and I thought it was honestly, I was even a little bit, the third act was, I think, a little bit frightening to me, because I was like, to see these
Mm.
characters who had been so much like, oh, we're not good, we don't want to indulge in the exploitative nature of Hollywood, then
Right.
succumb and go back on everything they said so that they could get famous themselves in order to get ahead.
Yeah.
I was like, I thought that was very
Yes.
effective horror. And it was honestly a horror I was not anticipating, which I was like,
Again, everything you're saying is why I just feel so ambivalent about this
yeah,
film, because you were making such an amazing argument. What you were saying is so true. It's emulating how I feel. You're just articulating it better. But where I think the film loses me is not in its parts, but in the sum of its parts. And a really good way of explaining that is that I actually thought one of the worst parts of the film was the way that he segmented it by the horses, because I don't think he actually did it well. Like, if you're going to make it about the horses, like the section titles,
the
right?
Ghost,
Then
Clover,
you
Gordy,
need
Lucky,
to,
Jean Jacket.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. If you're going to make it about the animals, then you need to find a way to make it so that your explicit framing device, right? Because he actually has title cards that remind us we're in this new section, that the explicit framing device is more than just being like, and excluding the Gordy section, some of the other ones where they're just like, remember Jean Jacket? And they're like, go be like Jean Jacket. Like, he should have, and he's capable of actually changing it so that each part, if it's a jean jacket part, if it's a ghost part, that it needed to be more different in terms of, like, either we needed to have more of the horse literally, or more like Peele style, we needed to have a sense that this is the world for those of us who identify as ghost. This is the world for those of us who feel we are Gordy, right? Because there's this huge message in here about, like, are we the animals or are we the humans? Do we have the agency or don't we? And he's not. I go back to, he's better
And I see,
than the flaws
and
of this
I
film.
think that what you're saying, this is so interesting, because I think that this shows that there is, at the very least, there is a lot here to chew on, because everything
Mhm.
you everything, I think I agree with everything you have just said, and I kind of find that interesting and kind of almost horrifying that we don't spend more time on these animals, and that ultimately at the end of the day, if we're forced to go and like be reminded that these animals are being sacrificed. And I mean, only Otis ever is like, I don't want to kill the animals. But his sister is very quick to be like,
Yeah,
no, I don't care. I don't care about these horses. I don't care. We got to be famous. And I honestly think that if Kiki Palmer wasn't there, I think that Otis might have made the decision to just keep sending out one animal out, one horse out as a sacrifice to this UFO and alien thing in the sky, because he respects the animal, and he doesn't see that
yeah,
alien as other. He sees it as an animal like himself and relates it.
I
Whereas
agree.
Kiki Palmer sees that as the other, and she's like, "We got to kill it. I don't care about these horses who are also other to her." And I don't think if she was there that the film would have played out the way it did. And I honestly think
I
that kind
agree.
of, I think that relates to the horror that where we see the corruption of Otis, where he's like willing to kill these animals in order to advance his family's monetary status.
I agree. And again, when you're talking about the individual threads, specific characters, their relationship with things, their relationship with the creature, their relationship with the animals, their relationship with the all-consuming nature that is Hollywood. I'm super okay. I just don't think that if you take a step back, right, if you look at sort of a macro level, that the film was as effective as it was on a micro level. And a good case in
Yeah.
point is that the creature was
Mm-hmm.
amazing. That design, like giving us something that kind of looks like a manta ray,
Yeah.
but then becomes this like beautiful
There's
other
a
thing.
great
The fact that it has its own camera lens. I mean, there was so much that was beautiful. And on the micro level, like individual pieces, it was fantastic. How it worked in this larger film is where I began to have problems.
Yeah. And I think maybe I
Yeah,
wonder I imagine film our reactions will change upon another viewing, because I think another part of the film that I haven't always enjoyed about Jordan Peele's filmmaking, but I found myself to like in this one, is the way that he kind of like will subvert and twist audience expectations. So there's this fantastic quote that he talked about on the interview, on the press junket for this tour, when he was in his interview, talking about with the New York Times. He was talking just about how he's like, I really wanted everybody to think that they were coming in for a Close Encounters storyline, like UFO kind of thing. But bum bum bum, it's actually Jaws. It's a Western Jaws. And I was like, and for me, I enjoyed that subversion. I was able to get into it, and I think personally on this initial viewing, any of the like ambivalent things that I didn't quite fully get, or I was like could be cleaned up, I was willing to go with, because I liked the characters and their relationships and the thematic things that Peele was attempting to kind of portray. And I perhaps on another watch, I may agree with you and be like, yeah, it was a bit messy. I think he could have cleaned it and tightened it up. But I think that, yeah, I think it's just such an interesting and rich text with so much there. And I absolutely see why that could be a
yeah.
problem for some people. But I thought it was a good time, and I was just willing to sit back and like be entertained by the constant subversion of my expectations.
And I think for me, the things that I appreciated about the film, which was a lot, were a whole bunch of strands and threads, but strands and threads alone don't make a film, right? So I was able to love so many of the elements of the film without enjoying the film itself, because I thought that, if like, we say that like an object is the sum of its parts, but in this case, the equation did not equal the same as the threads, right? Like, so if you were to add up the threads, it should be like a really high number for me in terms of how much I loved it. But when you added them up somehow, it wasn't that element, right? So you couldn't actually, for me, have the film be as good as a whole as it was in its individual pieces, which again is an intriguing accomplishment.
Absolutely.
And
And you know what, Jordan, maybe, and I don't think this is an excuse, what I'm about to say, but in these interviews that I was looking with Peele's been talking about how he's not done exploring this world, and that there are characters who have been established either in the film, or honestly, it's been kind of weird. I've been reading about a character called Nobody, who only makes an appearance in the trailer for the film
mm,
and is listed on IMDb, but is not in the movie itself. And when people have been asking Peele about this character, he's like, it's definitely something, and there are more stories to tell here. If so, maybe we'll be getting more within the Nope cinematic universe. It's based off your sci. I don't know if you would be
I
taking the journey on the
yeah,
UFO.
I will, I will watch anything that he makes at some point in my life, right? And I actually, again, I loved the concept of the world. I loved the idea of, like, at least on a boat you can be like, well, I don't want to deal with sharks, I'm gonna leave the ocean. So I love, I mean, there's so
But they
much that I
can't they
loved about
can't
it.
leave their home.
Yeah, yes, they can't leave their home, like this is his territory, and it raises all of these questions that I think about all the time, about like what is our duty and responsibility as caretakers of the world, as opposed to how we think we are, which is the most important thing on the planet.
Yes.
So I
And I
will be very excited to see where he goes next in some ways, but I have a problem with this grab bag approach that he seems real keen on, right? Of like, well, reach your hand in and maybe you'll pull out Nobody and we'll see what happens next. I hate that viscerally. So,
yeah.
but like, again, I loved so many pieces of this film. So I think it's something that people should watch.
Yes.
I think it's something that people should talk
Yes.
about. I think one of the things that Peele will guarantee to offer is that he is a genius. He is not flawless. He's certainly not perfect, but he has an ability to take stories that we thought we knew and make them in different
Yeah,
ways.
because I also am like, I think that even if it doesn't entirely work, like every time feel like, and I think I don't. I'm going to say this for us too. Even when it doesn't entirely work, I always enjoy seeing what he's experimenting with because it's usually more interesting than so much of the other like schlop that kind of comes out of the Hollywood machine. And so I think I'm even like even when I was like so frustrated with Us, I am like still so happy he got to make that movie. And this one
Yes.
too, I'm like it's such an interesting film. Like it's a black horror western about the entertainment, about a really specific niche of the entertainment industry. And we didn't really even talk about the Western element that much, which I thought I really enjoyed. Particularly just
Yeah.
setting it out in the West made for some really gorgeous cinematography. And I liked a lot of the cowboy
Not to mention
elements.
that reminder that the West is so fabricated,
Right.
right? Like that the only we have Otis, the real cowboy, like a literal cowboy, and then we have how we all imagine cowboys
Yeah.
are, like and so absolutely. I think you're very correct, right? That there are horror films we've talked about on this podcast where at the end of the day it was like and done, right? We have really nothing left to say in our discussion of 45
Yeah.
minutes. We are 40 minutes in, and like you said, we haven't even talked about genre. We haven't talked about genres plural. We haven't talked about constructions of the West and what it means that none of our characters who are embodying imaginary or real versions of the West are white bodies, right? I mean, there's so much we could talk about any of the films, and I think that's what makes Peele so important. Is you could teach his films in a way that you can't teach every horror film, because not every horror film yields these rich
It's
conversations.
so much more and I think it's so much more interesting than just is it like I think a lot of times like when we
Yeah.
don't have a ton to say perhaps about a text we'll spend a lot of time being like is this an affirmative or a disaffirmative text, like for
Yeah.
instance the Conjuring, it's a fine film but there's not a ton going
That's got some
on
good jump scares.
underneath the surface. It's so the filmmakers tell you exactly how to feel. The story is so streamlined and clear. There's not a lot of room for debate about like what is the Conjuring really trying to say. Whereas this is a very very different piece. It's a lot. There are a lot more strands. There's a lot more that could go wrong with this story. And I mean, as clearly evidenced by your response, as well as I do have to acknowledge, even though I'm a big fan of it, I've been interested to see the online critical reaction to this, which has been not. It hasn't been as good for this as it had been for us. There had been a lot more people beginning to kind of like push back against Peele, which I found interesting. I was like, interesting that this is the one that you guys are pushing
Yeah.
back on,
Yeah.
because I was like, I thought that at least in this one, a lot more of the thematic ideas were more fully realized than in Us, when it kind of just felt like in the second half, they switched themes entirely and picked a whole bunch of new ones. Whereas at least with this one, I'm like,
Yeah.
I think it's in this box. They're all the same thematic ideas around spectacle and putting your trauma out there for people to entertain, and how do you present yourself in a world in which labels are all meaningless and made up by people in power. And
Yeah.
so I think that is like truly commendable, and at least makes like we've been having it makes for a rich conversation regardless of
It
if we
does.
agree or not, of if it's effective.
And I said earlier that the film needed to be about 30 minutes shorter, but I would like to say, or about 10 hours longer, right? Like I actually, as you were talking just now, I think part of the problem is that this shouldn't have been a
You
film,
think it should
right?
have
It
been a
should have
mini
been,
series?
I think it should have been a limited
Mm.
miniseries.
I would now.
And I know he wouldn't have been able to afford that.
I'm not gonna yuck
Yeah.
on Jordan Peele being given more money and more time to make more horror. So
Yeah.
you please keep going, please.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously that would have been really hard because he would have had to get, have I don't think people are always as willing to allocate equivalent amounts for a mini series, particularly as every streaming service is rethinking things as studios are able to give a film. But even if it had been a series of films from the beginning, not this like reach in the grab bag and see if you pull out nobody. But like, it is a 3 film arc, right? So it's act 1, act 2, act 3. I think if he had something, right? Because I think you're right that just as we had plenty to talk about, I think that would have also solved my problem, right? Because it would have been the sum of the parts would have been different, right? Because it would have been longer. But yeah, you're right. This is a film that deserves conversation, whether or not you hated it with a passion untold, you loved it with a passion untold, or like me, you're constantly arguing against what the point that you just made previously. This is, this is a sign that Peele and the actors he's chosen, and the actors he constantly chooses, right? He chooses actors that prove to us the artistry that is
Yeah,
acting.
and I just want to like,
And that's
if we're
amazing.
not talking about this film come award season, particularly for Daniel Kaluuya's performance in this film,
Yeah.
I'm going to be very, very, very angry. It's going to be the same. I know that awards voters don't like horror and like refuse to give noms for great horror performances in the past, but they've been willing to honor Kaluuya with Get Out, and so I'm hoping that this will because I think this is. I don't know. His performance in Get Out was really good, but I thought Kaluuya was the standout actor in this film, just because of like his character is so interesting and different from the rest of the characters around him, and I think that could have easily been like made him like the boring, like kind of like character, but he elevates the material that he is given so much, and I just wanted to say that again before the film,
And
before we end it
I don't,
here.
and I definitely don't think he will get. He might get a nomination, but I don't think he will win because I think what he was offering was much more subtle than people are willing to focus
Yeah,
on in the Academy, right? Because like his affect is really flat for a good chunk of this film. And it's flat because that's his character, right? He's embodying his character so accurately. But I know that for some people, part of the problem is that they felt he was too flat. I'm not sure I agree because I've seen him in other stuff, and so I know it was a decision,
yeah,
not a lack of acting ability. But I think that the fact that no one's going to know what to do with this film,
he's gonna
the
hurt it.
fact that
Yeah.
yeah, and that we have to, or the Academy feels
Fun.
at the end of the day that we need to have a lot of white people,
Yeah, well,
right?
I'm not
So,
going to agree with that, but I was
yeah,
like, if fine, if the Academy only wants to award flashy performances, then they should at least be talking about Stephen Young because he's also quite good in
yes,
this movie. I mean, and I liked Kiki Palmer too, but I thought that of the pair of her between her and
yes,
Kaluuya, I thought that I really leaned to Kaluuya, and I thought that
yes,
I think
yes.
it's just a. I liked that though. His performance wasn't flashy, like you were saying. It was very
I agree.
subtle, and his facial. He was emoting so much with and giving so much from his like face and like
Yes.
micro reactions. And I think that is fascinating in a
Because
film
one of the
about
best
spectacle.
scenes, yes, because one of the best scenes is when Stephen Yeun's character's children are scaring him in the
Yes,
barn, and
yes.
he's just like,
Nope,
no, I'm not doing
nope.
this. And like it was such a fantastic, like, because that was a scary scene because you weren't sure yet what was happening. And yet again, it was so flat in terms of emotion, but that is how I think most of us would react, right? So I agree that the performances were amazing. We haven't even talked about Keith David, who played Otis Sr., who also was
He
great.
did a
Like,
good
there
job.
was
Yeah.
not a bad actor. And in this film, it's just, I don't have much hope or respect for the Academy. So I don't anticipate them doing the things they should because they traditionally don't.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I guess that there are some other elements here too that I think are at least worthy of like they're at least award worthy because of how impressive they are too. I think that the cinematography should be in conversation because
Yes.
the cinematographer who Jordan Peele uses, they shot the whole thing on IMAX cameras because Jordan Peele asked his cinematographer, he's like, if you were going to capture footage of an alien UFO, which camera that you have in your house would you use? And the cinematographer's like, well, I'd
Oh,
probably use my
interesting.
IMAX camera because it's the blah blah blah. He's like all of these reasons, and Peele's like, well, I guess we have to shoot the whole movie in that then. And I think it was really effective. It looks gorgeous. It's cinematography is the other element I think should be spotlighted, and we should continue talking about in awards season with this film.
we would love to hear from you all and to hear your thoughts about Nope, because obviously, as we kept like wrapping up the episode, but then bringing it back alive, and we're like, but wait, there was one other thing. You know, this is a film that I think we could spend multiple episodes on and just break down, which, you know, maybe like that becomes something we do at some point in our lives. But this is a film that forces you to have feelings, forces you to have thoughts.
Yeah. If you're interested in hearing more from us, you should go and check out our podcast on Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast from. We have 75 episodes for you to go back and listen to over all sorts of fun things. Give us a rating, leave us a like, give us a comment, and let us know what you want to see. If you want to see us break down this film into 5 episodes, talking about each 5 chapters, you let us know. I don't know if Katie would be super happy to do it, but I'm happy to do it.
I would be happy to do it if I feel that way after a rewatch.
Yeah. Once we get the rest of the Nope cinematic universe, we'll see.
That's right. That's right. I don't know if there should be a cinematic universe, but okay. What are people going to get from us next?
So we are going to be going back to our franchise roots. We're returning to the Friday the 13th franchise to talk about the final chapter, which is not the final chapter of the Friday the 13th franchise. It's just the 4th film.
Yeah, I got to tell you, these titles in the Friday the 13th franchise are really very confusing. So it is the 4th film. That is all I will remember because I can't remember. They're all the final something.
Right.
But yes, film number 4. In the meantime, Toni and I are talking about what our next book will be, so that for those of you that are reading, you can start thinking about that. We just haven't decided because there's a lot of great stuff out there. And again, reach out to us. We are at varying points in our lives very active on social media, and if you reach out to us on there, we will respond and be excited that you are engaging with us. Thank you so much for listening to our nightmares,
and have a spooktacular day.